It all started with a fruit cart. Not a symbolic fruit cart, a literal one in Sidi Bouzid, Tunisia, owned by a man named Mohamed Bouazizi. He was a university graduate selling produce without a permit because that was the best job he could find. On December 17, 2010, a municipal inspector confiscated his scales, slapped him, and spat in his face. This wasn't some grand act of tyranny, it was the mundane, soul-crushing humiliation that authoritarian states perfect. It was death by 1,000 bureaucratic paper cuts. Bouazizi, having exhausted all official channels for getting his property, his livelihood back, walked to the governor's office, doused himself in paint thinner, and lit a match. He wasn't trying to start a revolution, he was just a man who had run out of options. Turns out, so had millions of other people.
Suddenly, the world's media, particularly in the West, found its favorite news story, the Twitter revolution. It was a beautiful, simple narrative. Young, tech-savvy Arabs using Facebook and Twitter to coordinate and topple their geriatric dictators. It sounded fantastic. Almost too fantastic. Because while social media was certainly a tool, a very useful one, the idea that 140 characters could dismantle a 40-year-old police state was, to put it mildly, optimistic. In 2011, internet penetration in Egypt was barely 20%. In Yemen, it was closer to 10%. These weren't uprisings coordinated from a Silicon Valley campus. They were fueled by decades of repression, economic despair, and the kind of anger that spreads through word of mouth, not just a Wi-Fi signal. Technology didn't create the rage, it just gave it a slightly more efficient way to RSVP. Then came Egypt. On January 25th, a date shrewdly chosen as the National Police Day, protesters flooded to Tahrir Square in Cairo. For 18 days, it was the center of the universe, a place of incredible unity, where Christians protected Muslims during prayer and secular liberals stood with Islamists. It was a beautiful, chaotic, revolutionary festival. Hosni Mubarak, who had ruled Egypt since the invention of the Walkman, went through the classic dictator's playbook. First, ignore them, then send thugs, then give a condescending speech. None of it worked. The military, a beloved institution that also conveniently owned about a third of the economy, rolled in their tanks, announced they wouldn't fire on the people, and were hailed as heroes. This is called foreshadowing. On February 11th, Mubarak resigned. The world cheered. The hard part was over. Or so everyone thought. The revolutionary fever spread, and in Libya it met Muammar Gaddafi, a man whose 42-year rule was less a political career and more a piece of bizarre performance art. While other leaders were trying to sound conciliatory, Gaddafi went on television and promised to hunt down the protesters house by house, alley by alley, zenga zenga. This was not a man interested in gentle reform. The protests quickly became a bloody civil war. NATO, fresh off a decade of questionable interventions, decided to intervene again, establishing a no-fly zone under Operation Unified Protector. This basically meant bombing Gaddafi's forces until the rebels could win. And they did. Gaddafi was eventually found hiding in a drainage pipe. His capture and unceremonious end was broadcast on every phone screen in the world, a grim finale to a very strange show. If Gaddafi was theatrical, Bashar al-Assad's regime in Syria was coldly efficient in its brutality. It began, as these things often do, with something small. In the city of Dara, some teenagers spray-painted "It's your turn, doctor," on a wall, a reference to Assad's previous career as an ophthalmologist. The regime's response was not a stern lecture. They arrested the boys, tortured them, and pulled out their fingernails. When their families protested, the local security chief told them to forget their children and make new ones. This single act of unbelievable cruelty transformed local protests into a national uprising. Assad, who the West had once hoped was a modernizer, showed he was just his father's son, but with better PR. He chose to burn the entire country down rather than give up a single inch of power, and he's been doing it ever since. Meanwhile, the ultra-rich Gulf monarchies looked at the chaos and decided, no thank you. Their strategy was beautifully simple: panic and spend. In Saudi Arabia, King Abdullah unveiled a benefits package worth $130 billion. That's not a typo. He threw money at the problem: salary hikes for public workers, unemployment benefits, massive housing projects. It was less a reform package and more a national bribe to please stay home and not get any ideas. The other Gulf states followed suit. Simultaneously, countries like Qatar and Saudi Arabia began playing kingmaker in the chaotic new landscape, funding various rebel groups in Syria and political factions in Egypt that aligned with their interests. They effectively turned the Arab Spring into a proxy war for regional dominance, because nothing calms a popular uprising like a flood of foreign cash and weapons. Back in Egypt, they were trying out this new thing called democracy. It was messy. In 2012, they held an election, and the winner was Mohammed Morsi of the Muslim Brotherhood. He won with a slim 51.7% majority. For many of the secular, liberal activists from Tahrir Square, this was a disaster. They hadn't overthrown a military dictator just to get a religious conservative. Morsi's government was clumsy, overreaching, and managed to alienate almost everyone. So, in 2013, after massive protests fueled by a petition campaign called Tamarod, the military stepped in. Again. General Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, the man Morsi himself had appointed, removed the president in a coup. He was, of course, hailed as a savior. Egypt had successfully completed one full lap, ending up right back where it started, only with a different general in charge and thousands of political prisoners in jail. And what about Libya, the site of that successful humanitarian intervention? It became a spectacular testament to the importance of having a plan for the day after. With Gaddafi gone, the country shattered. Everyone with a militia, and suddenly everyone had a militia, carved out their own little kingdom. For years, Libya had 2, sometimes 3 competing governments, none of which controlled much of anything. The power vacuum became a playground for extremists and human traffickers. By 2017, journalists were filming open-air slave markets operating near Tripoli, which is a thing I just said about the 21st century. The intervention successfully removed a dictator. It also accidentally created a failed state, a humanitarian crisis, and a Mediterranean gateway for instability. Mission accomplished. Amidst all this wreckage, there was Tunisia. The place where it all began somehow managed to not completely implode. It's often called the lone success story of the Arab Spring, which is a bit like being called the skinniest person at a hot dog eating contest. The key difference was compromise. Unlike elsewhere, Tunisia's major political factions, specifically the moderate Islamist Party and secular unions, actually talked to each other. This effort, led by the National Dialogue Quartet, even won a Nobel Peace Prize in 2015, which
which is nice. But let's not get carried away. The country is still plagued by the exact same problems that started the whole thing: massive youth unemployment, corruption, and a stagnant economy. Tunisia didn't become a paradise. It just successfully avoided becoming Syria or Libya, a low bar that it cleared with inches to spare. So here we are, more than a decade later, looking at the bill. What did the Arab Spring achieve? The power vacuums it created became the breeding grounds for ISIS. The Syrian war triggered one of the worst refugee crises since World War II. According to organizations like Freedom House, most of the countries involved are now objectively less free and more repressive than they were under the old dictators. The hope of 2011 feels like a historical artifact from a different universe. It was a powerful, spontaneous, and tragically human demand for dignity. But it turned out that getting rid of a tyrant is the easy part. Building a stable, functioning, and just society in its place? That's the real revolution, and it's one that remains unfinished. It's a sobering reminder that history doesn't move in straight lines toward progress. Sometimes it just circles back, leaving you right where you started, but with more scars. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more historical insights. Thanks for watching, nerds!